earlier. Welcome to our second webinar on the statewide performance improvement project. And we're not going to go ahead and take roll call right now, but if you would email us and let us know who's on the line, we'll make sure that our attendee list is updated for this presentation. A couple housekeeping rules. If we could ask you to please mute your phones and your cell phones. And for folks here in the room, we're located in Sacramento at the Department of Rehabilitation offices, and thank you to our host, the Department of Rehabilitation, for providing us with support and space today. And we're going to go ahead and again ask folks in the room to kind of minimize activity as we're recording this presentation and the microphone is fairly sensitive. We will need to move around a little bit with various presenters, so we'll try to be as least disruptive as possible. Today's webinar is going to include a question and answer discussion from the last training webinar and previous conference calls, and I just wanted to offer an apology right after that. We were not able to post the audio recording as easily as we'd anticipated because our technology at DMH didn't support the size of the project. So we have been working, I should say, folks in the room have been working feverishly to transcribe that presentation, and it will be posted this week. So our apologies for that, but the other materials have been posted, and we'll go ahead and open it up in a moment for kind of a Q&A discussion. We're going to ask our panel of presenters from the last webinar to participate in that response, and we're going to have to minimize it to some extent because I think we've got a number of people on the phone. So we'll do our best to be responsive. We want to also encourage you to email us your questions. And we will, if we can't respond to them today, we will post responses to them as quickly as possible. So as well as the Q&A discussion today, we'll review the activities since our last call and talk about some future objectives. And we are going to do a walkthrough of data that has been gathered to date by the Department of Mental Health and APS. And then we'll talk a little bit about our objectives for our next presentation. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Caroline to talk about recent activities.
Good morning. My name is Caroline Castaneda, and I am here to talk to you a little bit about what has transpired since the last conversation that we all had as a group. We did establish the design and implementation work group, and we have about, I would say about 25 to 30 participants, and it's a variety of cross-section. It is a DMH representative from both the program area as well as program compliance and our data folks, as well as CIMH is participating, the APS healthcare in there is participating, a number of counties and providers. We have LA County participating, Casa Pacifica, Edgewood, STARS Behavioral Health, ONCA Behavioral Health, CMHD, of course, is involved. CCC MHA is also involved in the process. San Mateo County, Riverside County, the California Plant Family Alliance is involved. So there's quite a large cross-representation. And what we've been able to accomplish so far is we've reviewed the document that we talked about in our last webinar that we fondly call the Roadmap to a PIP. And we've reached some consensus that there will be some portions that will not have a statewide component. So items such as barriers really is going to be an individualized county response. So the group as a whole is really trying to frame the statewide study question as a broad umbrella under which each county can look specifically at their local data and formulate interventions and questions. So far we have discussed the section called problem definition as well as some of the root causes, and one of the goals, one of the reasons that it's been really important for the whole group to leave some of this roadmap to be defined at the local level is that at the statewide level, we have a lack of detail around what exactly are the services that are being provided. We have a general breakdown, but we get to that mental health services, and we don't have that detail, and counties do. also have posted a number of data discussions with APS and our data gurus in preparation for the presentation today, and you'll see the fruits of that effort today. And, of course, we continue to honor the agreement to hold these stakeholder calls every 2 weeks, and our next meeting will be August 13th at 10 a.m. to keep everyone posted as far as our progress goes. And we are also continuing to have our weekly updates posted on our EPSDT PIP website at CMH. And we are very pleased to report that we have nearly 5,000 visitors so far to that webpage. So again, we just really want to thank you for your continued participation in the process, and it's really what's going to make this a successful project.
This is Rita again. I'm just going to let you know we are receiving email questions, and so please keep them coming, and we'll do our best to respond to them kind of intermittently throughout the presentation today. And with that, we'll turn it over to Sophie.
Good morning. Sophie Guerrero with the Department of Mental Health, and Caroline's kind of gone over where we've been this last week, so I'm going to cover a little bit about where we're going and our objectives and timeline. You'll see we are still looking at a pretty ambitious time frame to have this PIP and roll it out. We are doing our data review today. We were shooting for the week of the 28th, and we made that. We have Mark Grimm from the Department of Mental Health and the APS folks going over data that we've been looking at and presenting that here today at this meeting. Caroline mentioned that the implementation group had also been meeting on the study question. The objective is to have an umbrella study question by August 8th. The idea is that the department will develop a study question that's broad enough that will allow the counties to take a look at their data that's specific to their counties and develop questions that will be applicable based on what you're seeing in your counties, and take a look at developing a question where you can have interventions that will be applicable to what you need. We're looking by the end of August to start the discussions on the barrier identification and the development of interventions, which is the second part of the roadmap to the PIP. As Caroline mentioned, we'll be initiating those discussions, but the individual barrier identifications and the interventions will be pretty much left to the counties to find barriers and interventions specific to their counties, and then work with providers in their areas to address those issues. We will be working on a communication strategy for getting the PIP out not only to all the MHPs but also to the providers within the state, so people aren't as anxious as I think they have been in the past about what's coming out. So we'll hopefully have that out by the 31st as well. And we'll be developing the plan in collaboration with the MHPs and stakeholders. We are looking at having all that done by the end of August 31st and get the PIP and the barrier identification and development of interventions out to the county so you can start working on that and roll that out.
Okay, hi, this is Rita again. And thank you all for emailing us. It's helpful. Just going to talk a minute about great ideas. One of the things we wanted to post on the website were folks' great ideas about how to roll this out, and to date we've received a couple. I want to give credit to our MHP participants from Sacramento County who brought early to the table that they were utilizing their regularly scheduled QI committee meetings to begin a dialogue with local providers on PIP implementation. And Contra Costa County brought up a very good point at our meeting on Monday about get started now, look at local data that can inform your process. We'd like to get a lot more great ideas, and I want to really encourage our stakeholders, our providers, and MHPs, folks on the call here, and folks you know or things that are going on in your community to continue to communicate great ideas to us. We will post those and give credit for those. I think it's helpful to everyone as you find what works in your areas to get that information to us, and we'll make sure we can share it with everybody involved in this project. I'm just going to ask you to, we do have folks whose phones don't appear to be muted. If you could go ahead and mute your phones, please. We'd appreciate it. I'm going to talk a little bit about progress on the study question. Hi, Sonoma County. Could you mute your phones, please? Thanks. Progress on the study question. As was mentioned earlier, that we have determined that we are going to develop a very broad statewide umbrella study question to get started. We've worked in the last couple weeks with the design and implementation group on the first 5 pages of the roadmap to a PIP. It was determined that we would add a paragraph to that document kind of explaining this new process, and we've worked to design a problem statement and a study question. But a really great meeting on Monday where we talked about some modifications to the information that we provided, and we're working internally. Comments are due on that from the design and implementation work group by close of business today. To date, we've received about a half dozen comments. That's really helpful. And we're going to be working tomorrow with in our staff to look at the information that's been provided and revise that document to bring back to the group on Monday's meeting. August 15th is our target date for a draft information notice. And it says here to MHPs, but it's actually going to go to the design and implementation work group, which includes our CMHDA representatives and our provider representatives as well as DMH folks. And we'll be walking through that draft information notice, which will give instruction to the counties on the expectations for the implementation of the Performance Improvement Project, as well as our goal is to attach the revised Roadmap to a PIP document to that information notice for utilization by counties and their providers in implementation. So August 15th is our goal to have some more dialogue on the information notice, and again, this next Monday will be another discussion of the first 5 pages of the Roadmap to a PIP. With that, I'm going to ask my esteemed colleague, Mark Grimm, to talk a little bit, as well as our esteemed colleagues from CMHDA and provider organizations, about the value of data. We're going to transition to the part of the presentation that we think is probably what we have a number of folks who chimed in here for to hear is talking about what data is available and why data is important to our various organizations.
Good morning. I'm Mark Grimm from the Research and Evaluation Unit, DMH, and I was asked to speak a little bit about data and why it's important. And I think it kind of begs the question. I think all of us have some impression or understanding of why data is important, so I don't want to bend everybody's ear going over the real obvious. But to kind of summarize, the DMH's role at the state level, there are many roles, but one of the primary things that we do is worry over obtaining and, in hard times, retaining the funding that's available for mental health programs that are delivered at the county level. To do that, we work through a budget process with the executive branch and then ultimately work our requests for either retaining or obtaining additional funding through the legislative process. And that budget process is based almost entirely on data. Good news or bad news, whether it's appropriate or not, that's the way it works. Numbers drive the process. And there's 2 categories of information that really are important or that drive this process. And that's the data that reports cost, the people that are served, and the results in sort of a backward look. It's kind of what was or what is today. And then the second part of it, which is awfully difficult, particularly in any of your health-related programs, is taking those numbers on what it was or is for costs served and results and predicting that into the future as to what it's going to be. Whether there's more that's needed, there's unmet needs, the costs are appropriate or inappropriate. And to do this, we basically have to rely on data. And, of course, the Department of Mental Health is one step removed from the delivery of services. As I stated, we get the money. It goes to the counties. The counties are really the agent by which our clients are served. In that sense, being one step removed, we really rely in a very substantial way on the counties and the providers for that information that we use to drive this process and keep it alive. The data actually is both a blessing and a curse for us at DMH. It informs the process, and everybody expects that we have a number for everything. But on the other hand, the danger in it is that it only informs the process to the extent that it's accurate, that it's complete, and that the information that's collected correctly describes the reality of the clients and the services and the results that come from those services. In terms of the data that we're attempting to collect and that we maintain repositories for, our best guess, and it is but a guess, is that 85 to 90% of all the data elements that are necessary to do a good job at managing mental health for the state of California have been identified, they've been communicated, and they're in one reporting system or another. Sometimes not well coordinated, and you have to pull data out of one piece and match attach it to another. But we think we pretty well know, having looked nationwide, what we need to count, how we need to collect the information, and if we had that, we'd be well on our way to describing the process and managing it well. But we have a number of problems, and again, part of this is that arm's length that DMH has with respect to the services that are provided. And the first is a problem with timing the reporting of data. I think many of you are pretty well informed of the difficulties we have there. The short-term medical health program, just in its normal billing cycle, and that is the source of a lot of information about mental health services, allows billing to be submitted for a very long period of time, and often the information we're trying to work with at the state level can be anywhere from 6 months to a year out of date. So it's pretty difficult to state that we're describing the process accurately when we don't actually have information that's real time. So often we have to go back to the county for additional information. Some of our other client services reporting systems, quite a number of counties are up to 6 months behind due to computer problems, the data problems, editing problems in the routines and programs. So the accuracy of and the timing are important and causing us some difficulties. And then finally, we deal with the fact that a lot of that information is incomplete. We find gaps in the process. To that end, and how that really relates to the PIP process, is that we firmly believe, and we've stated from the beginning, that the PIP process that we're talking about today really needs to operate at the county level. You're not at an arm's length from the services that are being delivered, whether you're the county managing the program or a provider actually administering the services. You have more real-time access to the data, and we hope you have a better appreciation for what the issues are, problems, and complications of reviewing that. So while we're introducing you to some data for the purposes of doing this PIP, the perspective of the research and evaluation component of DMH is that this data is a starting point. We'll show you some examples. We'll try to explain to you how we think that the examples raise some questions that are worthy of a PIP, that at the local level these issues should be looked at and resolved. But from the beginning, the data that we're going to be using and that you'll actually collect at the local level, we want you to view that as the starting point for client case evaluations, not as the do-all, end-all. And I'll actually, when we come time to go through some of the charts today, I'll show you some information that just jumps off the page at you that one person could assume, oh my God, there's a problem there, somebody needs to fix it. But in reality, when you look at the actual case file and go out and look at the client, there may be absolutely nothing wrong at all. So please temper your review of any information that we look at today, regardless of the source, with the idea that until you get to the case level, until you talk to the people that are actually delivering the services and consider that individual client, you don't have an answer, you only have a series of questions. So out of this process, we hope that you learn more about your case processes and management, that there are efficiencies that will improve the quality of services to the clients, and that also, as in a partnership, the counties will become increasingly sensitive to the critical nature of this data, that it be complete, that it accurately reflect what's going on, and that it get into the state level as quickly as possible so that we can use it to basically inform that budget and legislative process so that we can support those programs.
Thank you, Mark. Now I'm going to go ahead and introduce Suzanne Savano.
Hi, Suzanne Savano from Contra Costa County, representing the California Mental Health Directors Association. And to just sort of look at this from a county perspective, when we use data, when the mental health plans use data, I think there are three broad categories that we tend to start looking at data about. And one would be the broad area of system review and development. Where are we already providing services? How are we providing them? Is it meeting needs? Do we need to change the system? How to move it forward from that level? Another is in the utilization management, and another is in quality improvement. And I'm breaking those out for a specific reason today, in that in this process of the last month or so, we've really been making a distinction between utilization management and quality improvement. There are functions that overlap and interweave, but at times they're different with different people doing the activity, but the same data may be looked at. So just to bring that up. I would say that throughout the county there's going to be variation in terms of the data that a mental health plan is able to collect and analyze. so there's going to be a lot of variation, but I think there are some unifying historical issues that have come up that have brought all of the MHPs to some common ground. And probably Medi-Cal consolidation in the mid-90s really started that movement of every county having to look in similar sort of ways about their services, et cetera, and define service area needs. Another sort of statewide event that really moved us all in a more common direction was participate in performance improvement projects, because I think that moved all of us towards looking at data even more closely than we had historically. And then also, many counties over the most recent years have been taking on evidence-based practices, which are very data-driven. So I think that there are these broad areas of common ground between all MHPs throughout the state, and then you're going to find differences on just based on different localities. There are some counties that use data via standardized assessment tools for determining level and intensity of care. Not all counties do that. So there's going to be some individual variation as well. I think when we look at data and how we use data, again, there's some general issues to consider, and one is data source. And as Mark was mentioning, the state looks at a certain level of data. At the county level, we're looking at multiple levels, so that we look at Medi-Cal claims approved. We like to look at Medi-Cal claims paid when we can. We also look at CSI data, which the state looks at some level, but when we look at CSI, we go also into service that's funded by county general fund for the uninsured, which doesn't really always show up clearly in terms of kinds of services at the state level. And at the county level, that's very important. Also, increasingly, we're looking at Mental Health Services Act and the data that's collected there, so that when we look at our overall system, we're putting all of those data components together. And when we look at individuals now, we're also putting all those data components together, because to understand the service that occurred for a particular consumer, we really need to look at all of the different funding routes that supported the care of that consumer. Some being Medi-Cal and oftentimes not Medi-Cal. So it's the overall picture that we really need. I think then the next step is that we really need to frame our questions carefully. When we go to the people who have access to data, it's how we frame the question and how we set the parameters around those questions, which really sort of set the path of how accurate the data is going to be that we receive back. So there might even be trial and error. You have a question in mind. You say to the data folks, this is what I need, blah, blah, blah. They go and look for it, but a lot of times they need a lot more parameters to really hone into where you're going. So that's the next general component. And then I think the third is, once the data is delivered from all these various sources and the carefully defined questions, it's understanding what the data means. And what we find is that we need multiple perspectives from a variety of people who are involved in the care, but coming from different angles, different perspectives, to really get the context of what this data needs system-wide, but also when we get down to individuals. So when we talk about performance improvement projects, that's certainly the case. When we talk about this one at hand, where we're really going to be working very closely with our contracted providers, it's understanding our data, understanding their data, how we get those perspectives together to really...
We still hear a lot of background noise. It sounds like somebody doesn't have it on mute. Could they possibly put it on mute?
And then how we move forward from there. And I'll just use one local example of how we sort of wove this together. About a year and a half ago, and also to say that mental health professionals are intuitive thinkers. It comes by nature and to some extent by training. And then along the way, we really start embracing the empirical and trying to put that together. But what I find is that often our intuitive thinking leads us to a question of what's going on here. I think this is going on. I think we need to do this, but we better look at data. So then we look at the data. Sometimes our intuitive thinking is borne out, and sometimes it's not. Sometimes it gives us an awareness that we wouldn't have otherwise had. So about a year ago, we wanted to, in our county, look at high service need adults. When we decided to do that, we just incidentally said, okay, we'll put high need children in the mix also and just sort of take a look. When we did that, our focus went from the adults to the children because we saw some really unusual things there. So we selected a child that was really very high-end, both in service units and dollar amounts. And again, also at the county level to say that it's not just dollar amounts that we are looking at, but it's service units. And so we have some providers who have high-cost services, maybe fewer services. We have other providers, particularly on our network, which are relatively very low cost but high volume. So just to put that in as well. I'm sort of weaving around here. So we looked at this. We looked at a couple of particular children. We zoned in on one. We did a chart review. We still didn't quite understand it, so we asked the provider to join us in a quality. So at that point, it was a utilization management. We then realized it needed to move into a quality improvement process, so we contacted the provider. We asked them to go through the same charts. We asked them to do an internal QI process to help us understand, and then we came together. As a result of it, which we never could have done, the provider was able to identify, and it's a very respected provider. They identified something that was going on with their information system, the way they had set up some of the claiming processes that had led to these significant errors. So they identified their IS problem. They corrected it. They told us how they would correct it. At that point, we went from the utilization management to the quality improvement, and then we realized we were then at a compliance point because it was a recognized problem. The problem was addressed and corrected, but we realized that there was a great deal of claiming that had gone on that shouldn't have, so we then went in and disallowed the services. We mutually agreed upon that, disallowed the services, paid the state back. So I'm giving that as an example of how we started with data for one reason, looked at it in another way, took it from utilization management to quality improvement, and then wove the compliance piece in and completed the whole process. So I feel like I'm rambling a little bit, so I'm going to stop right now.
Thank you, Suzanne. I'd also like to introduce to you Nisette Short, who will also talk to us about the perspective of the provider on the value of data.
Well, Mark and Suzanne did such a great job and went through a lot of detail and really hit most of the points I was going to hit, so I will just reiterate those are most important. One thing that was raised that I wanted to, that was part of my notes, was that we really are doing a lot more to collect data kind of at the state level, at the county level, and most assuredly at the provider level. Through the use of evidence-based practices and just through kind of how the mental health system is evolving, the collection of data and using that for TQM purposes at the provider level are really kind of exponentially kind of growing in the past couple of years. I really think that the data that we're all collecting and that this PIP will lead us to is an opportunity to have a conversation not necessarily about utilization management and audits and those kinds of things and documentation, but as Suzanne was mentioning, more about quality of care, quality of service, outcomes for children and youth, the things that we all are striving for and that we all need to work together to improve, and that I think this PIP can help lead us in that direction. So I think, as Mark mentioned, I think we're all going to be a little surprised, but I think the providers really do have a wealth of information, very specific, very concrete information, very child-specific information, and then programmatic information that I think is going to be very helpful to us as we talk about the system and about how to improve it. As Mark mentioned, the state's data is really kind of very far removed from service delivery, and the provider data is all about in the service delivery method, and I think it'll be very helpful for us as we move forward. The other thing I think I just wanted to highlight, and I think Suzanne mentioned this, is that the value of real data, not just to kind of sit there and sit by yourself and come to conclusions, but the real value of the data to start conversations.
to have those conversations, you have that data, and to begin really partnering to kind of communicate about what's going on. I think oftentimes we kind of accuse other folks of being very siloed as we deal with certain children's issues, but I think oftentimes in mental health, we ourselves can be very siloed. So I think that the value of kind of using this process to collect data, to review data, is to have conversations to break down some of those barriers and some of those silos, and really partner to see where we are and see where we can go and see where we need to be. So I think that's one of the values really of this project, is to use some of the data at all three of the levels that we have, at the state level, the county level, and the provider level, to really see accurately where we are and where we need to go, and how we can partner to do that effectively.
Thank you. This is Caroline Castaneda again from the Department of Mental Health. And as we have been talking about data, one of the things that our partners at APS have done is provided us with a set of data questions that you can take to your vendors, whether you're a provider or the mental health plan, and really just start the conversation. I think the one commonality here that we keep hearing over and over is communication, and let's not be in silos. So really, it's the document is about two pages, and it will be posted to the EPSDT website this week, as well as we'll send it out to the ITWS group. So the goal of the document really is to just get you started in your conversations with your information technology department, as well as your vendors, where you could be really starting to look at a local level, what data is it that you're currently capturing. One of the things that is, I don't know that I'd go so far as to say a guiding principle, but one of the important pieces to look at as you go through the PIP is you want to use available data. We're not asking you to go above and beyond what you have. Look at what you have already. Sometimes what you have is going to give you a good starting point to identify barriers and what interventions might be appropriate to overcome those barriers. So really use the data that you have available. Find out what you have. Do you capture clinical data? Do you capture billing and reporting data? Start asking questions like, how quickly are you able to review the services that are provided from the data service that they're provided to a client? How frequently do you look at data in your county? Which leads us into our next bullet point, which is talk to your colleagues. How do they use the data? Who's using the data now, and what are they using it for? And along with that, our last bullet, talk to your providers. Again, what data do they collect? How are they using it? And how can it be used for the purpose of the PIP and in improving your system at the local level? So again, that handout it will be posted on the EPSDT website this week, as well as sent out to the ITWS group. So hopefully that will start some discussions at the local level about what data is available and how we might use it in this process. So with that, we're going to turn to part 3, which will be on data presentation and methodology. Again, the goal here is to show you what we've collected at the statewide level and show you how you might do it at the local level as well. So with that, I introduce to you Samitra Samgupta from APS, who will take us through the MHP profile methodology data.
And this is Rita from DMH. I just wanted to remind folks that the purpose of the data that's being released by the department and APS is for the purposes of the Performance Improvement Project. So please bear that in mind. I think we're all taking some steps forward. We have not talked in great detail at an individual level in the past, and so with that comes some risks and some anxieties we can certainly appreciate. So again, just bear in mind this is for the purposes of the Performance Improvement Project, and with that, we'll hand it over to APS.
Good morning. So we have a series of data right now coming up, and we'll start with more of a state-level data. And before I begin talking about the data, I think one of the things those who are in the counties are hearing from us all the time that the PIPs really start with data, because you would not know what the problem is if there is a problem if you're not looking at the data. So some of the things we have started doing both at DMH and at APS is really looking at some of the patterns of data at various levels and trying to identify exactly what kind of things need attention and how to go about that. The different levels of data that we'll present it today are state-level data, and there's some individual-level data which Mark Grimm will present, and then Sheila Baylor, my boss here, she will present from APS, provider-level data. So I'll present the first part, the state-level data. And the previous slide kind of said that this is really just for informational and educational purposes. It's not a very conventional frequency distribution in that it's not uniformly distributed. We have gone through several iterations, and what we have decided is how to highlight what the pattern is. So we have collapsed some categories or some dimensions here, and in some cases we have split them up. So what you're seeing right now, there's various things to talk about one graph, and you will actually see 3 of these once I go through them. This one is calendar year 05, and there will be CY 06 and CY 07, but they pretty much contain the same information. So let me just start explaining what is in this graph. First of all, let's go to the top. It is the statewide EPSDT beneficiaries served and approved claims payments for CY 05. So the most important thing here is that it's approved claims. So there are various types of data we can start looking at: submitted claims, approved claims, and then paid claims. The ones that APS Healthcare gets from the state is the approved claims data. Second, it's EPSDT beneficiaries only. Those who are in the counties and have attended our sessions, you know that we bring, for the last few years, we've been bringing high-cost beneficiary data. So this is kind of a expansion of that data. Here we kind of expanded the whole spectrum of that service dollars and number of beneficiaries, and confined it to EPSDT only simply because this is related to the EPSDT PIP. So on this graph, we have 2 kinds of bars here. The ones in kind of the brown ones, it's appearing as brown here. What color is it? Burgundy color. Okay. So there's the burgundy color and there's the purple. The burgundy color is showing, and on the right you'll see the legend. That's showing the percentage of clients, and then the purple one accompanying it is the cost percentage. So if you go to the bottom for a second, there's in tiny prints, there's some overall information there. So in calendar year 05, there were 186,703 total EPSDT beneficiaries. And EPSDT, since it's by definition it's Medi-Cal, I wanted to mention something else, is that we are presenting only Medi-Cal data, and of course, you know, at the local level, you can expand your data to look at various other angles of that, as I think Mark and Suzanne were both talking about the importance of the local data and what is available there. So here we have that limitation. It's approved claims, it's EPSDT only. But on the other hand, this does allow us a window into a bigger pattern when you look at a larger data set across the state. So in CY05, we served 186,703 EPSDT beneficiaries, and for a total approved claims was a $0.88 billion, so $880 million. And the mean cost per beneficiary was $47.05, and the median was $18.15, which immediately tells you, if those who are statistically inclined, you know immediately if there's a big difference between the mean and median, it's very likely to be a skewed distribution. And the maximum we spent for one beneficiary was $322,454. And the lowest we spent for, well, we don't have the minimum here, but the lowest is we have seen in, and actually when Sheila presents her data, you will see some of the claims were for even $6. And for a standard deviation, and that's really the key for the difference between mean and median, the standard deviation is a little over $9,000. So now we can start looking at the bars. So I'll start from the left side. There are a couple of things actually. As you look at this, you'll see that as you move from left to right, your burgundy colored bars start going down in size, and the purple ones start going up in height. So what that means is that as we move from left to right, the first thing that we notice is that there's more and more dollars being spent for fewer and fewer beneficiaries. But the left side is important as well. There is a significant number. In fact, that's 21%. The number at the top of the bar is the percentage. So there's 21.6% of beneficiaries get only about 1%. Is that? Yeah, 0.12, right? Only 0.12% of the total cost. And if you move to the next one, this is below, I'm sorry, okay. This is below $500. So it was 1.12% of beneficiaries accounted for 1.2% of the cost actually was spent after 21.6% of the beneficiaries. This is below $500 group. Then 500 to 1,000, that was another 2.16% of dollars and spent after 13.9. In fact, this one, if you combine the two, you kind of do a mental calculation there, and you can see that over 1/3 of the beneficiaries really fall below $1,000 a year, or at least in CY05. Then as we start moving to the right, you'll see at some point, somewhere in the $4,000 to $5,000 range, there are some bizarre things going on. Yeah, we are going to interpret this.
Our computer's been taken over.
Well, it hasn't been taken over, but I think there's somebody's doodling on that. So,
thank you for your.
But right. So, but if you're the presenter, you should have full control. Okay. Well, we want you to know that we are not doing that here. Somebody else is doing it. So, sorry about that. But. Somebody saw a flower in the middle, but I was going to explain that flower actually. So in that area, okay, thank you. I knew that there would be fun when I present. Somewhere in the middle where the flower just disappeared, you'll start seeing that the burgundy kind of breaks even. So after that, the purple takes over, which essentially means that around $4,000 to $5,000 range per year, where we see that there are almost equal number of beneficiaries on both sides and the percentage of dollars. And then we start getting to the right where it gets really extreme, and you see at the rightmost column, you see 2.32% of the beneficiaries accounted for almost a quarter, 24% of the dollars spent. That's $240 million that was spent for just about a little over 2% of the beneficiaries. So if you combine, again, the top two, then you start seeing, well, 1/3 of the dollars, that's 24 and 11, I'm adding them up, so that's about 35%. is spent after just about little less than 5% of the beneficiaries. So there are obviously some interesting questions. Let's go to the next slide, please. I want to go through CY 06 and 07 very quickly. I'm not going to go over the numbers, and if you have questions, we'll take that when we have an open Q&A time. But what I really want to point out, and let's just go to CY 07. Take a look at this one and the third one, and the main thing that really stands out, that this pattern persists. It's very stable across every year. So I don't know. I mean, I have a kind of a research head. So what that tells me that if we were to do something with this pattern, it needs some intervention. It's not going to change on its own. Sometimes there are data where you can tell, well, you know, it's just too extreme one year, next year it will change. But we have 3 years worth of data, and we really don't see much change. If you can look at the mean, you can look at the median, you can look at the standard deviation. They're fairly stable statistics. So with that, I think I'll end here, and I'll be back if there's any questions about this graphs during the Q&A.
And as a reminder, you can send your questions to EPSDT.PIP@dmh.ca.gov. And there still seems to be a buzzing background noise, so if you could just check your phone, please.
All right. Client profile methodology. This is Mark Grimm again from the Department of Mental Health. And I want to give, by way of covering this topic, a little bit of introduction to it. The profile charts that we're going to look at are suggested by the Department of Mental Health as a tool to provide a quick, easy-to-reference overview of services and costs at the individual level on a month-by-month basis for selected clients. And notice I say selected. In this process, we have to work through the selection criteria, and it may vary by county to some degree. But the charts that we're going to show are created for the purposes of demonstration. Who you would include to create these charts for would be based on decisions in terms of the construction of the PIP and your target audience. The charts that we're going to look at are simply samples with some informed and some arbitrary decisions as to what to include. So these were actually put together in the early days discussing the process or the concept that we may have a PIP coming. Again, that don't take, as gospel exactly what's included. You'll need to modify these or adjust these as appropriate to meet the needs of your local PIP process. Also, again, I want to reiterate that regardless of what you see on any of these charts, and for that matter, on any that you might produce at the local level, the chart may or may not reflect the problem. I can't repeat that too many times because we pass these around the office in Sacramento and we get people all excited, looking just at the colors and the dots and the lines. And as you delve into the individual case more and more, you toss it aside and go, well, let's look at another one because there was really nothing there to work with. But on the first blush, it just generates some excitement. So we're using these to basically get people to think and to provide an easy way without pawing through an entire case record on an individual, kind of maybe be able to sort into groups at the first step of the process of looking at these cases and doing the individual reviews. For the county to use the formats that we're going to look at, you have to basically do three things. First of all, you have to decide on the selection criteria. Who's going to be included and what kind of data is going to be included in the process. Dollars, times, demographics, other case or client-related information, variety of funding sources. And, of course, for this session here, our primary focus are the EPSDT approved claims, and we're looking at community services as our primary group. But in the DMH charts, we've also added spot reports on hospitalization. And the hospitalization costs are not directly addressed in the PIP, but certainly it is a cost, and we want want to see them on the charts because it indicates something that's going on with the client. So we've overlaid hospital on community service costs. The second thing at the local level you'd have to do is decide what span of time you're going to look at and display on the charts. And really you start with when did you select? What's the triggering event that says you want to go out and look at a particular client's records? And from that point you have to decide how far in advance of that triggering event, if there is data, case record data prior to the triggering event, would you need to look at to inform the process to understand as much as you can about that particular individual and their service patterns. And then how far after the triggering event, to the extent there's additional data, do you want to look at to figure out what's happening with services beyond the initial point. So if you're looking retrospectively, the last 6 months or 12 months worth of data, whatever your selection criteria is, a particular individual may pop up, they hit the triggering point. If it's in the middle of that year that you're looking at for data, you've got to decide whether you want to look for 6 months before and 6 months after, or if you only want to look at data from the triggering event forward. And these are decisions that I think with the clinicians in the process, you'll have a feel for what you want to look at. In some cases, if it's a relatively new client or they've just triggered an event in their most recent month of service, you won't have any future data to look at. So the question then would be how far backwards do you want to look to basically start your process of review. And finally, what are you actually going to include on the chart? And as I said, the decisions in the samples here are somewhat arbitrary, and I'll just kind of walk you through and talk about them. And probably the easiest way to do that is to actually open up the charts and take a look. And let's see here, where are we at? Somebody help me drive. And okay, expand that out. And this is still not loaded. It'll take a while. Okay, we've got a series of charts here I've got up on the display right now. You'll notice the tabs across the bottom. You'll see pairs. You have cost sample 10 and services sample 10, and then 15. And as we work across, there's 2 charts for every individual. And basically, as process of discovery, when this process initially got started, folks were focusing on dollars. We also wanted to look. What you have?
Not up on the other part.
Oh, it's not up in the other part? Okay. Let me share it. There we go. For those of you looking at the blank chart with my name on it, it's probably a little hard to see.
This is Rita. We're getting some emails, complaints, or concerns about the noise on the
share on.
and you can mute your phones, or be sure your cell phone's on your phones and causing static. We'd appreciate it.
Share application. Now you can see it. Okay. As I was saying, we started out. The issue was, as you saw from the original tables, that it appears, at least from a statistical perspective, that the distribution of expenditures and clients are skewed in opposite directions. That is, we have a very small number of people consuming a very large number of service dollars. And so the first look we took at this at the state level was to go through and draw out sample records. And these records were selected for individuals whose cost of services exceeded an average of $3,000 per month for the months in a year during which they actually received service. So if they only had services for 6 months, we added their cost and divided by 6. And if the average cost was $3,000 or more, they were selected for being included in the charts. Having looked at the costs, and costs are the easy one because all the services have a cost. They're claimed. We approve the claims, and hopefully someday we also pay them. That's always a sensitive issue in these discussions. But you know, the cost can be somewhat misleading because you have a low level of service on a high-cost service, and it looks like a lot on the chart. So after we looked at costs, we create the same chart for the same time period where we actually look at the services. And we'll basically talk about what's on the chart. So let's start with cost sample number 6, and I'll just walk you through basically what we have. These were produced in Excel, and we'll talk about how to make these later, give you some technical information. But right now, we just want to kind of flip through and see how these might catch someone's attention and how you might want to look at a case. So we look at the costs for cost sample number 6, and we use this to overwrite basically the unique ID for the client. So for protection of privacy here, we call this person sample 6. This is a real record, and this comes primarily from the approved claims file, short DOA Medi-Cal, for the time frame you see across the bottom. We've also added in some information, some of which comes from the Medi-Cal file and some of which comes from CSI. And so basically we plot for each month the services that the individual received, and we basically plot the number of dollars, the cost of the service. So if we basically lay the cursor over any dot, there's crisis intervention, and the value was $270.60. And up here we have mental health services, $1,965 and change. So just a very simple profile, but by plotting this information for the cost for this individual for the time frame, we can see how the services stack. What's happening with this individual? What's it costing each month? So for any particular month, you would add these values, and that would give you the cost for services for the individual. At a glance, you can see what services the individual is receiving. If they have a hospitalization, or usually those are a single dot indicates the point in time for the cost in the month. So it's a very easy way, we think, to see a profile for what's happening. So what does this chart show? It may show absolutely nothing, but what someone might surmise is there was a beginning process for this individual, probably assessments going on, issues happening in this client's life, and at this point, on 12/1/2005, during the month of December in 2005, something happened that very markedly increased the cost of services to this client. Something appears to have changed. If we take a look at the same client and we look at the actual units of service, you can see that where we have a lot of activity here, a lot of excitement in terms of dollars, when you actually look at the cost, for instance, the blue line doesn't go up very much. Now, there's a caution on the side. It says caution, units of service vary by service. And then it says caution again. If you have a service which is a fixed price, and let's say for day treatment, if you double the numbers of days in day treatment, you just about double the cost. And the change in the size of the charted item for both charts will be proportionate to one another. But in, for instance, mental health services, you have basically an incident count on the services, but when you look at the cost, you may see a person only 4 days rather than 2 days, but the number of minutes you spend with that client could be substantially more on those 2 additional days, particularly if there's something very critical going on in that client's life history at that point in time. So you have to be real careful, and for those of you that basically do the coding and work in the counties, I think you'll naturally fall into this and you'll be comfortable with it. But for those that aren't, please be mindful that in one case we're counting the actual dollars, and the other you have to know what the units of service are. So for instance, day treatment is 1 day is a day. Half day treatment is 4 hours or a half a day approximately is an incident. But in mental health services, it's a contact, and until you go to see how many minutes of service were provided, you don't have a good picture of it. Fortunately, we have basically a relatively fixed rate for those minutes of service within category, so you can get an indirect indication of how many minutes of service were by just knowing what the unit cost is. So it's really important that you remember what these units are. And at the county level, your quality coordinators for reporting are your source. If there's any question on what's being reported in the CSI and into the Medi-Cal billing, talk to them. There's a manual on hand in each county for that purpose. So again, you look first at the cost. The cost of what triggered this individual to be included in the set. You can see the stack of services at any month, any point in time. And then you can look at the costs and see how that basically affected our services, rather, see how many services were involved and how it relates to the cost. We see items that are interesting here. We have cost of number 10. Number 10 is an interesting chart. You see it's a lot more activity, a lot more noise, if you will, in the graphics for what's going on. But I selected number 10 just as something to look at to stimulate a question. What happened here when all the services stopped? Happened in November, coming into December. So somewhere in late October through the month of November and into December, the services stopped and then abruptly started again. Have no idea what that is. They could have left the area. They could have been in some other type of program or treatment. Any number of items could have happened. But again, you see a break in service, and then you see that the relative levels of service when they come back into the system are a bit lower for each of the items they were receiving. but very quickly it cranks back up and goes back to levels that are fairly consistent with what was going on. Something happened here, a lot of case activity. One might speculate what happened during this time away from program treatment that might have contributed to what happens here, and is there something you want to do in case planning and management that would make a difference there? Again, all speculation. This is simply a chart to look at. Doesn't mean that there's anything wrong at all. That's cost. When we look at services, it's a little flatter. That's because some of the services have relatively fixed prices. So when you have a high level of day treatment, full, the rate doesn't change substantially, so you add days as proportionate to your changes in the actual services. Number 15, what's interesting perhaps about 15, a lot of activity, a lot of noise, a lot of things going on in that person's life. Service providers are very keenly involved. And if we look at the cost, again, a lot of money being spent for that client. You'll notice here we have inpatient. Somewhere on here is a dot. I think that's probably it right there. They had an inpatient episode. There's meds, mental health services, day treatment, intensive full, crisis intervention, and case management. And I always like to sit with the clinicians at the office, and they get to guess, speculate as to what might be going on. And, of course, without the case file, they don't really know. But it's interesting because they'll come up with scenarios, possible things that are happening, and we would expect that this would stimulate some interest at the county level to take a look at this particular case. Just aside from the fact that this person hit the triggering point, which was an average cost of $3,000 per month. If we go out to number, looks like 33, you can look at all of these if you'd like, but I don't want to spend the time. 33, we have a relatively low level of activity, and then it climbs. This could be simply indicative of a ramp-up. Basically, you're going through the process of assessment, finding out what the needs are. At some point, a determination is made as to what's appropriate in terms of services, and this may be the level that that person is going to remain at for some substantial length of time. We look at the services that are involved in that. You click back and forth. Again, you see the relationship between cost and services, so it's important to look at both. The mix here, there's a little bit of everything in there. Day treatment, rehabilitation, full, intensive full. There's an inpatient episode, TBS, crisis intervention, meds, mental health services, and case management. So there's a lot of things going on. It may be just simply that this particular county has the services available, and that you'd see more of this across the state if there were more resources available. It may also be that this is a special case circumstance where this person definitely needed this level and intensity of services, and that it all makes sense from a case management perspective. And finally, number 43, take a look at it. 43, again, low level of services, and then you can see a substantial change, and it keeps climbing. Now, some of the services dropped out here. We have meds intervention, and then it drops off. Somebody might say meds worked. It may not have anything to do with it at all. So, again, please don't jump to conclusions. Interesting on this one is if you look at the services versus the cost, see what happens with the cost on the meds, but it doesn't reflect in services because it's an incident of meds services, but it has an extraordinarily high cost by comparison. So cost isn't everything. It may be that the particular meds therapy that was required just happens to be very costly. It filled its purpose. It was appropriate. If you just look at it from a cost perspective, you get all excited. You look at the services, and it may well just make perfect sense that that's what was done. So again, the final caution is be real careful, how fast people start to jump to conclusions on this. At this point, rather than piddle back and forth through the charts, because you can do that yourselves, you can have some fun with them, let's talk a little bit about how you make these. Hopefully you can see a value in using these as a quick reference. One more thing before we go into how to do them. The information across the top here, I'll show you how this is inserted in a moment. We arbitrarily picked some demographic and case record items that were helpful at Sacramento for the purposes of sorting these into piles. These may or may not be the appropriate data elements that you'd want to have quick reference to on a case review at the county level. The sample code, of course, is just the secret code for the individual, so we don't have the unique case identifier. At the county level, you could well have the case ID on there, so it's easier to find because you have access to all these files directly. But when we're showing it in this fashion, of course, we want to cover it up. Sex was an indication, was something we needed to look at because we were looking at disparate levels of service between males and females, particularly in certain categories, so people wanted to look at that. Age, some services are more appropriate to certain ages than others or demanded more by certain ages. The diagnosis in this case happens to be simply the first diagnosis of 3 that are in the file. Depending on how your county records data, that may not be the one you want to look at. But we just arbitrarily picked the first one. And then aid code was something, again, at the Sacramento level we were sorting. It gave some insight to the people that were looking at the charts. But what you put on this chart is pretty much up to you and what data is available at the county level and how much information you want to put on this graphic display as a quick reference as opposed to going through the file. Now I need to get to the next set of charts.
There seems to be someone who lost their mute button. So if you could please put it on mute because it's making it very difficult for us to continue the conference.
I think you just close that one. There you go. Up the top there, you go. Close that one.
There's another.
Excuse me. No, not you. I'm sorry, there seems to be someone who may be in a very noisy area. Could you please mute your phone?
Yeah, just go to the desktop and open it inside. That'll do.
Charts right now, we're just in the process of transitioning in the technology, so bear with us for a moment.
It'll take a sweet time loading.
Yeah. Yes, folks, please double check your data. There's an awful lot of conversations here. I'm not a computer whiz by any means, trust me.
Don't worry. And we don't need to look at 2 of these. I can look at just one. We don't have to do the last one. So I don't need to do it back and forth. There it is. Oops, there you go. We're here. Now you want to go back to the application share.
Back to the application.
There you go. Are we up? Okay, folks. We're back. Okay. How to build one of these client profile charts. I'm only going to talk about one way to build a client profile chart. If you got any IT people in the audience out there, some of them will roll their eyes at this because this is kind of the lowest common denominator method to do it using Excel. There are any number of other software programs that are just, hard push your way through writing code to do it. But we wanted to show you a method which is relatively straightforward that by having your IT people extract data and exporting it to a flat file, folks that are clever with their desktop could actually sit and make these charts. There are actually 4 tabs across the bottom. We'll talk about each one and how they're used. The first, I just titled Demographics. And remember, we were looking at clients 6, 10, 15, 23, 25, 33, and so forth. This is just a truncated copy of what I call the driver table that created the charts we were looking at a few moments ago. So we have in here records for client 6, 10, and 15. And basically what we've done is we've had our IT shop extract data elements that we were interested in. And so we've got county where the services are being provided from, sex, age, the race as reported in the short bill of Medi-Cal file, diagnosis and aid code. And then we simply have a macro. Don't worry about that. Somebody at your shop can help you do that. But we take this information and create a string out of it. So here you see the same information here written into a single variable. And so there you see the sample code is 6, the sex is female, the age is 18, diagnosis, etc. Med race is code 5. We didn't convert that into a race. And then diagnosis, and then finally the aid code is 60. So you would create this information only for those people who have reached your specific county triggering point. For whatever reason they're selected, for the individuals that are going to have charts created, you extract this information and load it into a simple flat file on a tab in an Excel worksheet. Once this is here, basically you'd select the first person you wanted to work with. You would basically click on that variable and you would copy it. Just go up and copy it and then move to the next table. So we go to the next tab. And this is an example of the data that relates to these 3 people. So here we have client number 6. So the data elements across the top are the unduplicate key. This is our word for the individual ID. So there's your number 6. The service date, and that's in month and year. We have something called new service code, a new SF. This is simply the title that relates to the code. So we have crisis intervention, meds, and so forth. We have the frequency that comes right out of the file. That's how many billed events during that month for this particular service there were. Approved are the dollars in the Medi-Cal short bill claims file that were approved, 270 for this particular service. Units of service, there's 2 incidents, and the amount of time that was involved total was 60 minutes. Okay, this information you don't need to get too buried in at this point. It simply comes right out of your billing file. It's really straightforward information. Now we've extracted information for each service for each month. So July 05, this person had crisis intervention and meds. They may have had multiple incidents. Here we had 2 and 2, but we have a single record. You collapse the data about that particular service for that month into a single line record. And your IT people can do this very, very easily. Now, little problems here because we're going to use Excel. You have this yellow section called July the 5th, and they got a new service. Most of you haven't heard of yet. It's a new mental health service that's fully authorized called Z-Count. That's facetious. I just made it up. Excel has a habit of not doing work when it doesn't see anything to work with. So if there were no services during the month of July, but July was one of the periods you wanted to look at, if you don't have a dummy record, your graph will come out minus a month. And so if during the course of a 12-month period there's 3 or 4 months where there's no services, all of your charts are going to look different. So the Z-count is a way to force every chart to be n number of months. So in this case, we have a 12-month array. If there were no services, you just have a dummy record inserted in, and we call it Z-count. And then we give it a value of 0.5 for units and 0.5 for time. The key is to give it a value that's so small that it won't show up on your charts, so it doesn't become background noise and make your charts all look funny with Z-count in there. There's all sorts of other little tricks. If you print it in your chart in the background color, you won't even see it. But that's, a bit of complexity we don't need to worry about. But at any rate, for this individual, number 6, the first one that we were going to select, there's number 6. The flat file that your IT people would create would look like this. And of course, if we scan down, there's 6, here's 10, and there's 15, the same format for everyone. And once we have this information in this format, you can now make charts out of it. Now, the trick with the charts is it has to have a slightly different layout format. Now, I'm going to show you something, and before everybody howls, you don't have to do it this way. I'm just showing it to make it easy. This data can be reordered by your IT shop in this format. So here's that month of 7/1/2005 again. And remember, they had crisis intervention and meds. And here's crisis intervention and meds. We've simply taken the month, named all the services that they received across the top, and then inserted the values for the amount of money they received for each of those services. And, of course, there's a total line. So we simply rotated the data. Now, your IT people can do that. They'll start with a flat file that looks like this, but the one you want looks like that. Or, and here's where everybody can howl, you can actually do this in a pivot table. And I won't go into the details of how you use a pivot table, but actually once you have the data in this format, you can invoke a pivot table, which is very, very simple. Let's see, do I have a, layout, pivot table, wizard. You go into, it basically, once these variables are all named, you simply go to this little chart. You'll have your variables will be lined up over here, and you drag and drop them into the places you want them, so they actually move over and drop. So this is in the file. If somebody wants to figure out how to work this and do the pivot table, you don't have to learn how to do pivot tables. Just copy this format. So you drag your undo key to here, your service data to the row, the name of the service, the approved amount, and the sum of the approved, and don't worry about it. You click OK and continue on. And that will take the data that was in this format and change it to that format. Now, the nice thing about this is once it's done, you get drop-down menus, and if you look up here, there's client 6, 10, and 15. You can make the 3 charts in a row, one after the other. It's just quicker, it's easier to do it. Whereas if you had the data simply displayed as in this format, and you had all the 6s and all the 10s and all the 15s, you'd have to go in and highlight the data that you were interested in each time, and then create a chart out of it. So again, don't worry about the details of it. There's technical folks at the county level that can help you, as can the EQRO and CIMH people. But you get to this format, and then when you chart it, there we have our chart, which is what we were just looking at. It's a real simple process. And if we go back here and pick number 10 and hit OK, it automatically refreshes to the data for the next client. And you go to the viewer, and that's now the information for client number 10. Okay? Now, in doing this, there are actually 2 files. One does the cost, and one does the units of service. And I could walk you through the other one, but it looks exactly like this. The only difference is we pick different data. Instead of picking the approved amount, we pick units of service. So it's relatively straightforward. What you would do is once this chart was formed, let's say this was chart number, let's go back and put client number 6 here. Remember, we started out the process. We go to the demographics. We pick the information for this client. We would copy it. We go over to the chart driver, make sure we have number 6 in. We look at the chart, and you basically highlight that line and hit paste, and it takes all the demographics for client number 6 and posts it to that chart so that you don't get them mixed up later. And simply go down, if you're going to keep these in a file, change the name from Profile Chart Viewer to client number 6. You do the same thing for both cost and units of service. And you just do it over and over and over again. If you want to print them out, you print them and save them. If you're sitting in the office looking through, maybe doing a preliminary review, someone can sit at a desktop and just sort of flip through the charts and find the ones that pop out. You prioritize your work as you look at the various categories. And with that, I'll close. I'm sure there are a number of questions, but most of them are probably most appropriate for submitting offline or later in when we have open discussion.
Mark, this is Rita again, and this is where I'm going to let Sheila get a minute to walk up here. We have some questions submitted that we can respond to. The question was, would these slides be available for free? The answer will. And has the study question been established? And if not, what will the process be for that? Now, we spoke a little bit earlier in the presentation about the design and implementation work group meetings that are focused on the design of the statewide study questions that will be really broad in nature. And once that's established, which we are hoping to have by August 8th, we are working on information notice that will be distributed to first the design and implementation work group to review, and then distributed into our usual distribution process that will include instruction to counties that counties will be developing their own study questions in relation to their own programs. So you'll have the broad study questions from the statewide work group, and then counties will establish their own individualized study questions and essentially profile their own individualized counties. And with that, Sheila's setting up here, so bear with us for just a minute while we get the technology set up, and continue sending us your questions. Yep.
No.
Right. Yeah. The question from the audience was, or comment, I wanted to reiterate, is that what we present here today is mental health. It's not a prescription or a prescribed or required method for data crunching or resolution. What we wanted, we had several requests to show you how we got where we got, and so this was our effort to provide you with an option. Sure, counties have their own processes, their own data procedures. We want to encourage you to use those as well. We just wanted to show you how we got to the information that we use in arriving at the statewide performance project. Sheila's ready?
Yes, I think we are. And actually, it's an APS team. Bill Ullum has taken over driving in terms of showing the computer. Demetra is sitting across the table because he's going to interject when I either screw up, which is highly likely, or are fumbling for words, or to add a different kind of spin, if you will. First of all, one of the interesting things about this morning is that, in reality, although they're different years and different periods of time, we're showing you essentially the same databases, the same types of databases, even though we're going to move it to very different kinds of views of those. And this is simply another view of the same database, which is your favorite by now, and that is approved claims data. This set of data, however, has some characteristics that you all have not seen before. I know that there are people out there who are very used to looking at data, and there are also people out there, and in the room as well, that are not used to looking at data at all. This is a different kind of data set that we have not shown before, and so therefore I'm going to go really slowly. And it's going to feel like 1, 2, I'm sorry, but if I go fast, people are just, the first time you look at this, because we did not dress it up to look nice. This is just the way it is, and so it's not pretty. And we have not kind of highlighted in nice colors. So this is, therefore, the data. And I want to make sure that you take advantage of the potential for email questions, because I don't want to have people out there, a lot of folks, feeling confused about one item, and then it kind of interferes with their understanding of the rest of it. So please feel free. We have a system to easily kind of transfer the questions to me so that we can try to make sure that people are going along as best everybody can. Okay, so this is a different kind of project from what the folks at DMH in California have done before, because there are several sets of folks at the table together. And the state is here, the counties and their mental health plan management roles are here, and providers are here as well, and providers and their advocates and representatives. That means that we have the opportunity to look at a whole bunch of different kinds of views of the data that just one set of folks perhaps would look at only their own kind of purview. So the state is interested in the county, certainly, but the state is also interested in statewide data, and we've shown you EPSDT statewide data. However, each county and each provider in its own way is also a system and a community. And one important thing about this project is that everybody is working on trying to make the performance improvement project work. So therefore, we are going to look at and show and share and collaborate across different kinds of data than you have done before. And the purpose of this particular set of files that we did was to try to show the picture of the services done by whomever or whatever in each county in terms of EPSDT services. And then, of course, there's statewide data as well, but the statewide data you'll see as we get into it is going to be much less important in a sense than is the pattern that you'll be able to look at over time, because it's going to take some study. These are really big files. You can look at over time as to what the pattern in your particular county is. Who's doing what? How much of it are they doing? What does it compare? Where are the questions that this data set will bring to your minds jointly as you look at it? And again, it's designed to start zeroing in on the questions that might be most relevant for folks county by county to look at in terms of trying to work their way through to their own version of a study question and sets of interventions. So it will be out on the DMH EPSDT website, and I'm going to go through the filters that we have on the data as part of the presentation, because one of the helpful, we hope, things about the data set as we've arranged it is that we will show you how you can manipulate and show different parts of the data in order to look at what you want. And we have a whole bunch of filters on the data elements such that they can be arranged in a number of ways as you wish. So after the webinar, at some point in time, all this stuff will be out on the website so that you can download it. Now, it's a really big file. I think it's how many 794 worksheets. It's humongous. Let me describe it, and I'm describing it before we put it on because we find good old Alameda is used to it. They're going to be coming up first because they begin with A, A-L as a matter of fact. So Alameda is extremely used to having data shown in which it comes up and everybody's looking at Alameda. And that's the way this is going to be. Alameda has a lot of providers providing EPSDT services, so it's going to go on. But I just want to warn you that you are going to be able to see, and by no means will be showing, you are going to be able to see each county's providers, whether it be the county or anybody else, of EPSDT services according to, depending, numbers of clients in each service, numbers of clients that they serve altogether, the kinds of services according to each provider, the amount of those services, at least in money, and depending on the number of clients served, what the clients are served, how many clients are served by particular service. And the costs are also going to be there of each provider for each county. What we have done in the sense of the confidentiality regulations and laws is that if a client number cell in which it says number of clients has 5 or less, fewer people, we have blanked it out. So you'll see that those will be 2 little X's, and that means that it's 5 or fewer. Now you'll see that that has nothing to do with what the cost can be. And you'll see some very great variations, and that's fine. Now, there's nothing right or wrong about this. That's one thing that's very important to stress. You can't look at any of this stuff and say, okay, this is right, this is wrong, this is good, this is bad. That's not the issue. The issue is what are the patterns of services, and for example, from the county's point of view, although these are data that the counties each have, sometimes it's hard to look at it in one big fell swoop. So this provides the opportunity for folks to see, okay, what's the pattern, who's doing what, and therefore who should come to the point, as Rita had said, to just be able to sit down and have more information that can help. Okay, so let's put poor old Alameda up here, and we're going to start to walk through the top of the file, and we're going to Heidi's sort of coming in to help Bill because it's her computer that's being run here. There's one thing that I hope a lot of the counties have learned, and but I'd also like to make the plea again, and also to the providers. The point of these data is not to try to compare your local data with what these numbers show. It's an impossible task to do that, and it's really quite useless. If we were coming in and saying our audit standard is that you match our data, well, then that's one issue, but that has nothing to do with it. Data and how it comes out and what its results are depends a lot on very specific assumptions that are built in about what's included, what period of time, and how are you doing it. And that we had it up before, and I asked them to take it down. Oh, here we go.
Right.
Oh, well.
It's not going on to the other one.
No, it's not
shared right now.
Oh, it's not shared yet. All right. They're having trouble trying to get it back. I think we did have it up. So the data, therefore, is designed to be a snapshot of a year in which every county's data and every provider's data was pulled in the same, a large extent, as we are doing our own data to give to counties and to others. And why do we do that? Everybody here is used to fiscal data. it has to do with what the E2RO does, and it doesn't necessarily matter that much, to tell you the truth, if you look at the stable patterns. When we start our reviews in July, and we would like to bring data to the county that has at least one full year in it that's recent, in addition to earlier years now, as we've had several years' experience, then if we used fiscal year data, we'd be giving them stuff that's over a year old, because the fiscal year that ends June 30th, we certainly don't have data as of the middle of July when we start our reviews about that fiscal year's data. If we use calendar year, and here's Alameda, I see. Is it shared yet, Bill? Is it shared? It's out there. Okay, so Alameda is out here now. So just to finish the calendar year thing, we therefore, if we use a calendar year data, then we can at least show people that's only sort of 6 months old, if you will. And there's, and you will see if we've done a lot of analysis of patterns. It's not that different, and we do look at fiscal year data as well. Okay, so the first thing, it looks as if it's out now. Now, what I'm going to do is start, and we're going to go through what the title says, way up high when it says County MHP EPSDT, and then we're going to go through those, what looks like sort of grayish green on this screen. We're going to go through what the headers are here. So, okay, you're getting used to this. This is County Mental Health Plan EPSDT, and we put a dash that says DMH after it. For this project, DMH has specific kind of age criteria and other kinds of criteria for what is being called EPSDT. There's something of a difference of opinion about that. They have decided on a particular definition of EPSDT for this project. That's fine. So we, therefore, it was slightly different from what we had used in the past. So that means that we have used we have pulled this data and run it according to the DMH definition of what EPSDT is for this performance improvement project. And then it should say, this is not the, it should say LE5, and it doesn't. Okay, that's the problem. There's up on the title.
That's fine, though, but it does have exit up, so.
It does?
Yeah.
Okay, because you can all right, as long as it does. Oh, there it is. All right, I see over there, but it should have, okay. Oh, there's the L. All right, that's fine. It was too large a name, fine. All right, the L means we have them with and without the 5 or less X'd out, and I wanted to make sure that we had the one in which the 5 or less fewer clients were X'd out. So the LES or LE5 doesn't come through, but the L comes through, and as Smitra just pointed out, see way over there on the right where it says total clients, those that you see the little X's, and that means there are it's there, that the 5 or fewer are out. But this is, so let's go down now to the beneficiary. Okay, so beneficiary is definitely, it's as in county of origin. And that, see that little arrow that's down in the lower right? I'm not going to show that. I'm going to show the filters after we go through the whole thing, so you'll have a better appreciation, I hope, about what you can do with them. But each time you see, and we've got them on pretty much everything here, each time you see that little arrow there, it means that there's a filter on it, such that you'll be able to manipulate the order of how things show up. So this one's going to be the county, and it says down at the bottom there are 2 tabs you can see. One of them says all services. So that is what it means. These are all of the services in EPSDT. So, all right, so we know we're looking at Alameda, and we're looking at Alameda for a couple of slides, so we're not going to worry about going down here. But everybody else is there, too, just in alphabetical order, all the way down to YOLO. YOLO's always at the end. Region, we have that because some people are interested in that. This is the DMH region. Then the county size. We have, in the EQRO, developed our own set of definitions of sizes of counties or mental health plans because we find that things vary according to whether a county is large, medium, small, very small. And so the population of the counties vary as well. And they're in their own bands. And we have those definitions if anybody wants them, that's fine. Okay, the legal entity number. The legal entity number refers to the provider, and that is the provider legal entity number. And then there is the provider code. Yeah, okay, so legal entity is what the provider's sort of corporate self is across the state. All right, then bill or provider code.
And that's also provider code, but that's county specific.
That's what I thought. These guys are much better than I at the actual number, the kind of California issues having to do with how you name things. Bill's particularly good. The provider name even I can read, and so can you. So that would be what I would look at. But different providers have different kind of county sets of services according to county. So it's important to have both to know exactly what you're looking at. And then you have the city, which has to do with generally the corporate headquarters. Sometimes it has to do with the program that's going on. But you see down there, the very lowest one says West Central Mental Health Services, and it's got Los Angeles.
Right. So these are, that is specific to the provider code.
So it could well be an out-of-county placement or out-of-county kinds of out-of-county issues, which may well be a subgroup that folks want to look at in terms of this performance improvement project. Then can we get rid of that little thing at the bottom that says so that we can move over? Well, anyway, we'll get to it. You can see that's the approved claims, and again, there we go. And you see that even for Alameda, which is a large county, that the numbers vary considerably. And why don't you start kind of scrolling down? And you'll see that we're still looking at Alameda. And you're also seeing that over on the right, if you can stop it now, Bill, thank you, that the total clients, right a little bit more. There you go. Yeah. So you can see the average approved per client. There you go. And you can also see that even in a large county such as Alameda, which does a great deal of its business through providers and a very large set of providers, that you have a number of providers who are working with a fairly small number of clients, at least for that particular year. But then average approved per client is one of the things that is not equivalent to our average cost per client per year because, of course, it's only for this particular service and provider as well. We know that lots of folks are served by different providers in one county. And so we are going to start to take a look at that, and I'm sure it'll be much easier to take a look at that on a county basis. Let's go back now and let's start looking at the filters so that you can get a sense of what you can do before we go on to the really humongous one, which is by services. So this is county. So if you show, there you go. And that shows that we're in it's alphabetical. Now if you go up to sort ascending, maybe the descending would be, there you go. Now you get YOLO. And you get the list that you saw before, but it's reversed. So this is essentially the way that you can look at a county's data. Let's bring up somebody else, shall we?
I think I'll just make one comment because Rudy Arrieta from Yolo County is right here, and he just made a comment that I don't recognize any of these providers. And that is true because, as you can see, and that happened in Alameda, I noticed as well, that particular screen really had mostly out-of-county providers. And as you look at this file, once it's posted, you will find that every county, small to big, and the number of children who are receiving services in a given year from an out-of-county provider. So if you just look at one screenshot, it's very likely that you're looking at out-of-county providers, and that's why you may not, and that may be very few. As you can see, these are X'd out. That means during the year there were very few kids who were actually served by these providers.
Which is very interesting because people always talk about the out-of-county issues, but this is a way to be able to look at out-of-county numbers and potentially then start looking more closely at, as to who is, hey, we got an endorsement from the room right immediately here. And look. Suzanne's got a question too, or comment. A comment.
We wondered also, and I think it might also be the case that services are provided by providers without necessarily getting authorization from
that could well be.
the county, and so you look at it and say,
I didn't do this.
But they claim me as a previous.
Right. And also, it depends on your version of what is a managed care entity for a county, and where do the responsibility, I know that's an issue that you struggle with, where do those responsibilities start and where do they end, and what are their boundaries? This may help us and help you all to sort of size the issue in a different way. So that's extremely good information.
Does this also include county-provided services?
Yes.
Okay, so in some cases it'll be Alameda or Yolo County on the left, and the provider will be Yolo County.
Yes, for example, right up there you see Colusa County Mental Health.
Okay. I'm sorry, no, I can't read that.
Oh, you can't read that.
But that's, I believe you.
Yes,
Okay.
it really does. That's a good start, too, for this project. Great. Okay. Let's look at another. We're looking at YOLO. We might as, and we've got a YOLO rep in the room, so we might as well keep looking at YOLO here. Okay. So let's start. Is that the top of YOLO there? So you see, it is interesting because YOLO is considered in our system a small county, but at the same time, and look at all these providers that are providing services for EPSDT. We're finding somebody talking again. Yeah. And we're going to try to figure out who you are, so you might want to put it on mute. It seems to. We'll try it again if we need to.
Actually, in our scale, is almost on the verge of becoming a medium.
Yeah, it is.
Yolo and Butte, which are classified as small.
Yeah, well, they may. It's going to really screw up our data if that happens.
The data people don't like those kind of crossovers.
No. We hope that your population growth is controlled. Okay, so it is particularly in children's services, it appears that there are a huge number of providers in the state, and more certainly with MHSA, and also that the percentage sometimes of services provided to children and adolescents may be higher in terms of providers than the percentage of provider services to adults. And that means, therefore, that it's particularly important to be able to look collaboratively at everybody's kinds of activities. So, okay, Bill, could you go down? The region I think people are familiar with. You can see these are Los Angeles is its own thing, always, of course. And so therefore, again, you can look at it by the region that you happen to be in, if you choose to view that as an important variable. Some people do, some people don't. County size, sometimes that's useful, it's important to kind of pay some attention to that. Legal entity number, if one wished to, one could do it by provider and throughout the state. And that can be very illuminating, and people have done that, already run some of that. Provider code, as Bill and Sumitra said, that's the more programmatic. Provider name, you can do that essentially alphabetically, I believe it goes. So if you wanted to do that, that's another way to pick up the provider. And then the city, and then the total approved claims.
Sheila, I have a comment on the provider name.
Sure.
These are the names that the county assigned to that provider code when they submit it to DMH. It's from the state provider file.
Right.
That's where.
In most cases, it will reflect the corporate name in some fashion.
Yeah, but
if you see a Sierra or if you see a Seneca, there are larger providers.
Yeah. But sometimes when you sort this by the name, you'll see, for example, Families First is up here. It could be slightly different depending on one county. This provider could be have contracts in multiple counties. It could come across looking different, laid out differently, depending upon the county and how they formatted the name.
Right, and I think in the audience there should be quite a few providers. I think the interesting thing for you would be if you have a multi-county operation, you should really sort by legal entity number or select by legal entity number to get that your state.
Your overall, yeah.
Your statewide or multi-county picture.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can then compare and contrast the kind of services that you do, and we know that the same provider often does the same services across counties to some extent anyway, and we have a little habit of asking them as we talk to them in our reviews about differences, and they are also in similarities, and they are very good sources of that. And if they feel that it's not relevant to a good-bad thing, you're a good county or a bad county, but you have different processes this way and that way, it can be a very good source of information that could be useful programmatically, and from which I think the counties and the project might well benefit. So let's move over to total approved claims, if you could, and let's show. Let's maybe do descending. That's always fun. There we go. Now look at that. So you see that some of the numbers are fairly large, and that's fine. It's a really big state. We're talking about close to $1 billion. So that there are some very large providers in the state, and they do lots of different kinds of services. Again, fine, and that gives you some sense of what some of it looks like.
And many of them, the cost is really, when you compare with the average per client calculations, then kind of can see that's probably a very intensive service. It's
sure.
Total high cost.
No,
it's a very large number of beneficiaries, then it's probably an outpatient service or something. So you can see some of those kind of patterns here.
Okay.
Is that $4?
Yes. No, there is some stuff.
More interesting than whatever.
Yeah. It was $4. There's quite a bit of that in there, and I'm hoping that some folks with their little efficiency selves will say, how much money did it cost everybody to have somebody claim whatever, $4 or whatever it was, because that's the total. So there, you see $4 is pretty low, but you see 12, and you see, and I don't remember, but the whole issue about how much money it takes to write a check and have a company process it these days. It's many more dollars. It's about $10 or $12. So.
I'm glad it's not a yellow county.
Now. At the moment, we have no idea. Things can happen automatically and in some of these automated systems, and so sometimes it comes out peculiarly and sometimes it doesn't. There may be some filters that people may want to put in. Okay. And so it seems as if it's probably wise to go to by service now. These are all, if you go down to that next tab, this is even more humongous than the last one, because it cuts, slices and dices by services. So let's go over to the service activity, because that would be the one that would be different from the last. Okay, service activity. Again, what we have done in order to look at some of our claims analysis is we have done our own version of consolidating the various service codes. And we've done them for our own purposes, including some of the planned, unplanned stuff that we've been doing, so that we have these are our codes that we have consolidated everything into. And therefore, these will be the codes that you can sort by, and you can then see providers by counties, by services. And you can then look at the various patterns of service across the state for one thing. Let's look at TBS, because that's a very big deal kind of service. And you can then see that this is all, the service activity is the very same. Now let's maybe do total, can we sort the claims one by descending? So we'll now sort claims by descending, and we then get, over on the right, we start with the highest. There we are. Are we up there yet? Are we trying to shrink the thing so we can see more, so that we can get everything on here that is of interest? Okay, there we go. So you're looking then at the claims sorted by most down to the least, and you are looking at TBS alone, and then you can see the total clients and the average approved client. And that goes down and all the way down. Now, the interesting thing about TBS, those who receive TBS, is that we've run a little data on that, and if you take all the children and adolescents who receive TBS, and then you run an analysis in which you count you count all the services that they've received, including TBS, you come out with a group of clients who are, I believe, about 30. Depending upon whether you're looking at 3% or 5% in terms of the top group, you come out with, I think it's 29% and 36% of those. I think it's 29% or so of those in the top 5, and 36% of the top folks who are in the 3%. So that, to me, is at least an important subgroup for a number of reasons. An important subgroup to look at, to see the kinds of services that they're receiving and what the effectiveness are, and where does TBS fit. TBS is the highest cost per person and has been for the last 3 years. Doesn't mean that many people have that service, but those who do, the costs for TBS are the highest of the modalities that we track. So it's, again, how you can start to look. Not from this data set, of course. I couldn't tell you about how many kids who received TBS were in those high groups just from this data set. But it's very interesting as you put together then, all right, what are the patterns of TBS use? Can we look at the total costs for that group, and what can we find out about their service patterns, coordination, and their outcomes, all of which are very important. So one data set, even as humongous as this is, is not, and just provides one set of looks that you have to then put together with other things. I don't think there's anything that we haven't gone through. We have a little explanation of how to use filters on our website, but it's pretty straightforward. You press the little button and you look at the category. And so therefore, as you have downloaded it into your own system, you should be able to, if your system has enough power to manage this really humongous file, we think you should be able to do some work with it. So that's about, unless Sumitra, Bill, or anybody else in the room has another question or comment about this particular data set, I think, and if there aren't any burning questions that have come through on the email, no, terrific. I'm not sure that means everyone's gone away or whether I was terribly clear, but they're thinking. Okay, thank you. We'll turn it back over to the computer screen, back over to DMH.
Okay. Well, as we promised, our goal was to hopefully end early, and I think we will. Thank you to everybody who's been presenting. Very helpful. I also wanted to thank some other folks who are in the room who have been actively presenting, but I'll say this would not have happened without them. It would be John Dahl, Heidi Lang, and Nicole Johnson, who have worked feverishly on the technology and are sitting behind their computer screens making everything happen. And set this up, and are actually the folks that interact with you on the email system. So thanks for, and again, other folks here who have been contributing. Just to go our next step. Our next stakeholder meeting is going to be August 13th. It'll be another conference call, and we hope another webinar. We had a couple of, one thing I wanted to mention is we committed to doing these calls every 2 weeks, and we scheduled to the end of September. We find that there's not really interest in doing this every 2 weeks. We're perfectly flexible on changing that and going out and doing them once a month, but we will be here every 2 weeks as long as you need us to be. I want to really encourage people to use the website for more frequent updates. And our suggested topics for the next webinar, August 13th, is a data presentation by hopefully a volunteer mental health plan. So we'd like to share with the group how mental health plans collect and use data. And also we would be inviting providers to do the same thing, providers collect and use data. So one of the things we think is really important, since this is a statewide activity, is really a fully informed process that acknowledges all the different parts of the system. Again, you've got your the website, so you can send suggestions for future webinars or future conference calls. And with that, we were just going to ask some folks to step up and talk a little bit about the continuing role for the folks that are intimately involved in this process. And I think for the Department of Mental Health, it's sponsorship and facilitation and informing. I'll take that as a we are, of course, looking forward to the report that will have to be to the legislature, and we'll also be looking forward to how we go about data matching in that process, from the quality outcomes to the cost effectiveness part that the department's responsible for. Suzanne, did you have comments about CNHGA's continuing participation or role, just briefly?
I think that the MHPs will be stepping in. They've already stepped in and started processes to some extent. But really, I think the large responsibility for conducting the PIPs will be at each county level with the MHPs and the providers, and then coordinating with DMH. So I think that will be our main ongoing role.
Okay. And we have Ed Dixon with us from CIMH, who's been very, very involved with APS in the process of the various performance improvement projects statewide.
I mean, the way I see it is we'll continue being involved in all the different aspects of this, probably get more involved when we start looking at what the interventions are the counties are doing, clustering those interventions together, having that discussion, seeing what's working, what's not, and trying to disseminate that information among the counties.
And Mike from APS?
I'm Mike Ryder from APS. We'll continue to provide technical assistance to this level of the group, but we are also in in the midst of our 5th visit to all the counties, and we are prepared to provide technical assistance on site. And we have interesting information listed on our website, which is www.caeqro.com. All of our contact numbers are on there, and people can contact us for assistance. We can't do specific data for everyone. I'm sure we'll be involved in trying to accommodate a number of requests, trying to group requests so that there's things that a number of people are interested in. We can perhaps do that.
We always like to have to set at our table and continued involvement of our providers. And
you know, I think for the California Alliance and for our providers, what we'll looking for in the next couple of weeks is just to continuing to partner with CMHGA and APS and the department on the design study question. I think that's a critical piece to kind of start with the question and work through all of the details. So I think we'll be spending a lot of time focusing on that. And then the other thing we're really doing with our providers is encouraging them to look at their data, what data they currently collect, what they have, what kind of outcome data that they can make sure is in tip-top shape so that they can be good partners with their counties. And then the third thing is just really encouraging them to reach out to their counties early in this process to start having those conversations about what the data looks like, what data needs to be collected if it isn't already collected, and start, you know, making sure there's a real partnership and those conversations go on about the data and the kids themselves.
Can I add a comment, because I think NICET brought up an important part. I know that all the mental health plans are going to be partnering with providers, but we're not going to be able to include every provider in the actual PIP process when we're contracting with 300, 400 providers around the state. So I think there'll be a process at each county level of partnering with the providers that sort of make the most sense within that context.
Right, and part of that will just also be defined by the study question of the population as well. So, but we want everybody at the table to understand the process and where we go from here. And the trailer bill language we're anticipating also establishes that this is a 3-year process, and we'll be expanding the study group in the course of our discussions once this stage of the PIP is implemented. We'll be moving to stage 2, statewide PIP implementation, and talking about what the next study population will be. And after that, we'll all be here again talking about stage 3. So this is an ongoing process. We'll open it up now and take a chance. There's a lot of folks on the phone, but if there's some questions and answers we can help with today, we'll be happy to try and entertain those. If no one is inclined to talk right now, we also still have the email up, and the email is 24/7. So after a few hours down the road here, if you have a burning question, feel free to email us, and we'll be responding as quickly as possible. So anybody out in phone land?
I have a question.
Oh, okay. And can you identify yourself for us?
Humboldt County, we just heard about bringing in providers. I'm wondering, has any county actually approached their organizational providers and started to bring them into this process yet, and how they did it?
Sacramento County out there, is it UMA? They may have already left the conversation, but...
I'm from Sacramento County, not from the county, but a provider. They just invited us to get started when they did.
Okay. And Suzanne?
And in Contra Costa, we've started that process also, and so we're just reaching out to some of the providers that will be sort of in the first round process.
So the providers are being included in these calls?
Yes. I'm sorry, was there somebody? Sumitra?
Question, please, Sumitra. There's a question for me from NICET, who is sitting right here. And her question was, you seem to be making some assumptions that this breakdown of funds, services, and children is a problem. What are you basing that on? So let me just actually answer the first part. Maybe I didn't come out very clearly on that. What I meant to say, and I started saying that the PIP process starts with an identification of a problem. But that problem you cannot really determine without actually looking at the data patterns, and what kind of things you look at. So that's the piece I said. I really don't want to imply here what we're seeing is a problem. Sometimes it's not necessarily a problem. I think there may be something that can be improved without necessarily being a problem. Obviously, if we look at a 3-year pattern of data, which seems fairly stable, it may or may not be a problem. I don't want to go there, but are there rooms for changing that pattern, rooms for improving that pattern that may be, beneficial to those who are in that high-end services, or those who are not receiving enough services? Whatever way you look at it, there could be probably some room for improvement without being an outright problem. So that's what I just want to clarify that.
Right, and I think I'd go back to the example Suzanne gave earlier where there was an anomaly identified which ended up not being a treatment problem but ended up being an information systems issue. So I think what the data does here, and the reason we think it's important to have a full picture of the system, is to fully inform the questions that it brings up, and then the investigation leads to the conclusions. And we're in no way implying that any of the data presented here today implies any problem. It's just a matter of how do we get the breadth and depth of the system.
This is Irene from Fresno County. Can I ask a question?
Sure.
I know when APS presented the data, they kind of prefaced that by saying that they worked with the state to clearly understand how the state was defining EPSDT for the purposes of this test. I mean, for us, whether there's excluded aid codes, included, excluded, would the county be able to guess how that data was extracted? So when we pull our own county records, we're in sync with how APS is presenting that as well?
Yeah, we can, absolutely. And that's probably a question we want to put on our website.
Okay.
Dimitri, do you want to?
I just want to mention, Irene, you were probably at the DIG training, the data infrastructure training, where I presented the same data. And that data, there has been a little change since then. I think at that time, because of the kind of the fast-moving pace of the whole thing, we actually went with our definition, understanding of EPSDT, and since then, we actually obtained what DMH does from, I believe, from Mark Grimm, and we have changed our graphs based on that. So what you saw today actually is based on the new definition. So from now on, the DMH's own analysis and ours should be pretty much in sync, other than obviously the data pull and those kind of stuff. But generally, yes, we now have the DMH definitions, and we have to find out, it's not clear to me yet, and we need to talk internally a little bit how we want to roll that out. Obviously, we got some SAS codes and stuff, and that may or may not be the thing people are looking for, so we have to think of definition rather than actual codes.
Right, and I think when we talk about definition, it's what's included in the samples. It's not the definition in Title IX of EPSDT. That remains the same. So this is a way of looking at the folks served under that definition, so there hasn't been an extreme variation in what we consider kids served under EPSDT. It's just a data collection issue. So we'll be happy to post that.
I just want to make sure that as we pull it locally for each MHP, that, we are all consistent in how we show this and then how it rolls up from there.
The differences are really in inpatient and what is inpatient counted, and if so, what is inpatient. And so our definitions earlier were more broad. DMH is excluding inpatient, whether it be short soil or anything else.
Yeah. Basically, the focus of the performance improvement project is on high-end outpatient utilization. But
okay, well, that's good to know, because I was kind of wondering how we were going to pull in the inpatient.
Yeah, and counties have, in the design and implementation work group, I think it's been obvious that counties want to be able to include inpatient as part of the profile of the individuals they're looking at, and we have absolutely no problem with that.
Okay.
We're just looking, our specific interest is outpatient.
Maybe we should have this conversation in our design and implementation team. So I'd like to learn a little bit more about why DMH is selecting to take out the inpatient, and maybe we can have that conversation.
Absolutely. Sure,
that's clearly something that could use some data collection and better understanding of how we use inpatient here in California. So
sure.
So just to raise clarification issues. So this is identified as an EPSDT performance improvement project. And yet we had a lot of conversation about how at the local level we pull in all sorts of data. When we proceed with this performance improvement project, is it at the county level restricted to the EPSDT funds approved, or do we in fact step back and look at the whole array of services regardless of funding?
So what the state's going to be interested in is EPSDT. Counties absolutely do whatever's necessary in your system, because really we talked in our design and implementation workshop about what we really want, looking for here is systems transformation and consistent with the Mental Health Services Act principles around recovery and such. We won't stay. Our interests are limited at the state level. Your interests, I'm sure, are not. So we wouldn't want to interfere with the county's specific interests. Other questions?
Yeah, this is Jet with Shasta County. Just a real quick question. In looking at that spreadsheet, the last one, it's based on calendar year 07. Any particular reason why a calendar year was chosen to show financial information?
Okay, I'm closer to the microphone, so Sheila is asking me to respond. And I think that's what maybe you missed that part of Sheila's kind of preface for this data. At APS, we are really trying to bring the latest data that is available to us, and we believe have pretty much stabilized, so we are not bringing something too early on. So that's the principle we kind of operate from, which is slightly different from, most of the county operations and state operations. And I'll be honest, I think some of our APS folks here have worked for counties, and we always had this frustration. Anytime we tried to look for data, we only got data 5 years back from DMH. And so one of our things used to be that, well, how can we get more current data that is statewide? So at APS, we really try to bring as recent data as possible, but at the same time, the other practical item for us is really our calendar. That calendar runs along the fiscal year, and what we have found, and after the first 2 years of operation, is that if we bring the calendar year in, then for most of the year, for most of the MHPs, we really maximize our latest informational capacity. So that's the reason we bring it, and we often compare with the fiscal year data. And there are certain things we do when we come out for the reviews. Some of the basic data on penetration rate, approved claims, those things, we also provide a table where we provide the fiscal year, the last fiscal year data that's available to us as well. But for most analysis, we try to use we are kind of consistently using the calendar year data right now.
Are you looking at having us submit that way as well?
Looking at now that is actually a question kind of to be discussed and planned, but really it may very well be that fiscal year level analysis would be probably more meaningful at a statewide or even county level. So
yeah, we're trying to provide information that's quite valid at a particular point in time, and a lot of what you all will be looking at, because it's going to be a fairly fast-track PIP, you're going to be dealing most likely with more current data than either of the data sets that we're discussing. As we're looking at this going forward, and the state will be looking at it going forward for the current fiscal year.
We have a question on email we just wanted to respond to that I've either heard or read somewhere that we can drop one of our PIPs to participate in the EPSDT one. What will we need to drop a PIP? And we don't, again, it's just a resource issue about trying to do 3 PIPs at once. And yes, that is the intention, is that there's at the federal level and at the state level, we only require you to have 2 performance improvement projects. We put it as an option in some contract language we worked out with CMHDA and such about it being optional if you want to sustain the current performance improvement project. We're not going to tell you that you can't do that. You certainly can. If you can't, then this can replace one of your 2 performance improvement projects. With relation to how you drop a performance improvement project, we're probably not going to issue instruction about how to do that as much as you can do it, and I would think the quality of care issues would need to be taken into consideration, but I think it would depend on what the performance improvement project was, who was engaged and involved in it, and the meaning, pardon?
Whether it was real.
Yes, if it was real. That's one we've been struggling with. But that will probably have to be a county decision, we're thinking, and we'll be working with APS on some of the considerations that need to be made as APS is rolling out the reviews, which, of course, depending on what happens Thursday, may be an interesting point. So that remains to be seen. So, additional questions?
Yes. Just on that point, though, it might be worth it to go to the next step, because I know another group of questions is how, if it can be either clinical or administrative, and then how is that determined? Because it's put on the table.
No, thanks, Suzanne. That's a really good point. This is something we will post on our Q&A webpage. We're going to continue our practice, as we have in the past, of letting the counties define whether this is clinical or not clinical. And APS, when they come to do your review, as they've done in the past, will ask you, and you will define that. I think what we're going to do is go ahead and close this for right now, but please feel free, if you have additional questions, email us, and we will get back to you. I want to thank everybody for participating, presenters, audience members, and we'll be talking soon. Take care.
Yeah.
Sounds like people.